in the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains, in the dead of winter, 1959. 9 experienced hikers set out on what should have been a routine expedition. They were the best of the best, seasoned mountaineers, survival experts, people who knew the mountains like the back of their hand. But something went wrong. Something so terrifying, so unexplainable, that even today, more than 60 years later, the Soviet government's own files remain classified. What happened on that mountain defies every law of nature, every rule of logic, every explanation that science can provide. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a mystery that has haunted investigators for decades, a case where the evidence makes no sense, the injuries are impossible, and the truth and may be more terrifying than we dare imagine. Because when rescuers finally found them, what they discovered wasn't just 9 bodies. It was evidence of something so disturbing, so impossible, that it would change everything we thought we knew about what lurks in the darkness of our world. January 23rd, 1959. 10 young adults from the Ural Polytechnical Institute gathered at the train station in Sverdlovsk. They were embarking on a skiing expedition to Otorten Mountain, a journey that would earn them the highest certification in Soviet mountaineering. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, an experienced hiker who had led numerous successful expeditions, the kind of man who could navigate treacherous terrain with his eyes closed. With him were his closest friends, Zinaida Kolmogorova, an economics student with a passion for adventure, Rustam Slobodin, an engineer who lived for the mountains, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both experienced hikers who had survived countless winter expeditions. These weren't reckless teenagers seeking thrills. They were serious mountaineers. They carried proper equipment. They had detailed route plans. They knew how to survive in conditions that would kill ordinary people within hours. But as their train pulled away from the station, none of them knew they were traveling toward a mystery that would consume the next 60 years of human investigation. The group reached the base of the mountains on January 27th. One member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and had to turn back. It was a decision that would save his life and haunt him forever, because Yudin would be the last person to see his 9 friends alive. The remaining hikers continued their ascent. For days, everything went according to plan. They sent regular radio updates. They documented their progress with photographs. They were on schedule to reach Otorten Mountain by February 12th. But on February 1st, something changed. According to their final diary entries, the group had made a critical decision. Instead of following their planned route through the valley, they chose to traverse a slope known to the local Mansi people by a name that should have been a warning. They called it Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, this means dead mountain. The locals avoided this place. They whispered stories about it. Ancient legends spoke of 9 hunters who had died there centuries ago, under mysterious circumstances that no one could explain. But the Soviet students dismissed these as primitive superstition. They were rational, modern, scientific. They didn't believe in old legends. They should have listened. February 12th came and went. No radio contact. February 20th. Still silence. The families grew worried. The university launched an official search and rescue operation. What the search teams found on February 26th would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes in modern history. On the slopes of Dead Mountain, they discovered the remains of the expedition's tent. But this wasn't a campsite abandoned due to weather or wildlife. This was something else entirely. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not torn by wind or damaged by animals. but deliberately slashed by knives wielded by the occupants themselves. Long, precise cuts that could only have been made by people desperately trying to escape. But escape from what? The temperature that night had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. In that kind of cold, exposure kills within minutes. Yet somehow, these experienced mountaineers had chosen to cut their way out of their only shelter and run barefoot into the deadly wilderness. The first bodies were found near a cedar tree, about 500 meters from the tent. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both found wearing only underwear, both dead from hypothermia. But something was wrong with their hands. Their fingers were bloody and torn. The bark of the cedar tree showed clear signs of someone climbing it frantically, desperately, as if trying to see something in the distance, something they needed to watch for, something they feared was coming. The rescuers found the remains of a small fire at the base of the tree. Whoever had built it had been so desperate for fuel that they had broken branches off the cedar with their bare hands. Branches that were 4 to 5 meters high. Branches that required superhuman strength to break. 3 more bodies were discovered between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin, found in positions suggesting they had been trying to return to their shelter, but they had collapsed in the snow, one by one, overcome by the merciless cold. But it was the final 4 bodies that would turn this tragedy into an unsolvable mystery. For 2 months, search teams scoured the area. They used dogs, they used helicopters, they brought in the most experienced trackers in the Soviet Union, but 4 members of the group had simply vanished. It wasn't until May 4th, when the snow finally melted, that they were found in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. And what the investigators discovered defied everything they thought they knew about death. The bodies of Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, and Alexander Zolotaryov were not killed by exposure. They had died from massive internal trauma, injuries so severe that the lead investigator compared them to victims of a high-speed car crash. But here's what made no sense. Their external injuries were minimal, a few scratches, some bruises, nothing that would suggest the kind of force necessary to cause their internal damage. Lyudmila Dubinina's chest was crushed. Her ribs were broken, but there were no external marks on her body to explain how this had happened. It was as if some enormous pressure had been applied to her chest. From the inside, even more disturbing, her tongue was missing. Not bitten off, not torn away, surgically removed. The coroner's report stated that it had been extracted while she was still alive. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles suffered a massive skull fracture, the kind of injury that would result from being struck by a sledgehammer or hit by a speeding vehicle. But again, no external wounds, no sign of impact. Alexander Zolotaryov's ribs were completely shattered. His chest cavity was destroyed. The examining physician noted that the force required to cause such damage would be equivalent to being crushed by a tank. But they were found in a ravine, covered by snow, with no heavy machinery anywhere near the mountain. No vehicles, no weapons, capable of inflicting such trauma. The Soviet investigators interviewed every person who had been in the region during those crucial weeks. Hunters, geologists, military personnel. No one could explain the injuries. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. But there was something else. Something the investigators tried to hide from the public. Something so disturbing that it remained classified for decades. Several of the bodies showed signs of radiation exposure. Their clothes contained levels of radioactive contamination that were far above normal. Not enough to kill them, but enough to indicate they had been exposed to something extraordinary. And then there were the witnesses. Local Mansi hunters reported seeing strange lights in the sky on the night of February 1st. Bright orange orbs that moved in patterns unlike any aircraft. Lights that pulsed and danced above Dead Mountain for hours. Another group of hikers, camping 50 kilometers away, reported similar phenomena. They described the lights as blindingly bright and moving in ways that defied physics. One witness said the lights appeared to be communicating with each other. But the most chilling testimony came from the weather station personnel, who had been monitoring atmospheric conditions that night. They recorded strange electromagnetic anomalies, readings that made no sense, patterns that suggested something massive had interfered with the natural magnetic field of the area. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, was ordered to close the case after just 3 months. His final report concluded that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force. But decades later, Ivanov would admit that he had been forced to lie. In interviews given shortly before his death, Ivanov revealed that he had been ordered by Soviet authorities to cover up evidence of non-human involvement in the incident. Evidence that suggested something had deliberately targeted the expedition, something that possessed technology far beyond human capability. The area around Dead Mountain was declared off-limits to civilians for the next 3 years. No explanation was given, no official reason provided. The Soviet government simply closed it. Files from the investigation were classified and locked away in state archives. Witness testimonies were confiscated. Physical evidence disappeared. Even the photographs taken by the hikers themselves were subject to intense scrutiny, and several were never returned to the families. But some evidence survived. In recent years, investigators have analyzed the final photographs taken by the expedition. Digital enhancement has revealed disturbing details that were invisible to 1959 technology. In several images taken on the day of the incident, there are shapes in the background, shapes that don't match any known aircraft or natural phenomena, objects that appear to be observing the hikers from a distance. One photograph shows what appears to be a bright light descending toward their campsite. Another captures strange figures on the mountainside, figures that are too tall and too thin to be human. The families of the victims have spent 60 years demanding answers. They've sued the government, they've hired private investigators, they've organized their own expeditions to Dead Mountain. But every inquiry leads to the same dead end: missing files, destroyed evidence, witnesses who refuse to speak, or who have mysteriously died before they could reveal what they knew. In 2019, exactly 60 years after the incident, the Russian government announced they were reopening the investigation. They claimed new evidence had come to light, new testimonies had emerged. They promised answers, but their final conclusion was even more unsatisfying than the original Soviet report. They blamed an avalanche, a natural disaster that somehow caused internal injuries without external trauma. An avalanche that left no physical evidence. An avalanche that occurred on a slope where avalanches are geologically impossible. Today, Dead Mountain remains one of the most mysterious places on Earth. Local guides still refuse to take tourists to the exact site of the incident. The Mansi people continue to avoid the area, just as their ancestors did for centuries before 9 Russian students learned why. Because somewhere in those frozen peaks, something is still waiting. Something that knows the true story of what happened on February 1959. Something that the governments of the world would rather keep buried in classified files forever. And if you ever find yourself in the Ural Mountains, if you ever see strange lights dancing in the darkness above the snow, remember the 9 hikers who cut their way out of their tent and ran barefoot into the killing cold. Remember that they were running from something that may still be there, something that may still be watching. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. 9 lives lost, 6 decades of cover-ups, and a truth that may be too terrifying for humanity to accept.